But I want to lead here with what I think is one of the most undervalued running backs. And I know people may not like this at all, but it is Melvin Gordon. I think Melvin Gordon is one of the most underrated, undervalued running backs in fantasy football, especially if you start your draft maybe with a bell cow running back in the first round, and then you dive into like wide receiver, and then you want to have a couple other running backs. Like Miles Sanders is always sitting there in around round 8 to round 10, and so is Melvin Gordon. And I, just like everybody else, I see the upside in Javonte Williams. I think he's a stud. He's my RB2 in dynasty leagues. If there was no Melvin Gordon, he would be a lock and loaded top 5 running back for me. I won a lot of consolation brackets last year with Javonte Williams on my squad. The year before, I won a lot of consolation brackets with Cam Akers on my squad. It took a couple, a few games for those rookies 2 years ago. It was really nothing from Cam Akers towards the end of last season, and then towards the end of 2 years ago. And then last year, Javonte Williams, same sort of deal. It was Melvin Gordon. Then we started to see a little bit more Javonte Williams. And then towards the end of the season, we saw a little bit more Javonte Williams, especially in the receiving game. And he got some more work out of, inside the red zone and red zone packages. But take a look at these numbers from last year between these two running backs. Like, could it get any closer? They each had 203 attempts. 900 rushing yards, 4.4 yards per pop, 4.5 yards per pop for Gordon. This is the biggest difference. The 53 targets for Williams, 43 grabs for Gordon, 38 targets, 23 grabs, more receiving yards, of course, with more work in the passing game for Javonte. The red zone usage was in favor of Melvin Gordon. Gordon finishes with 12.2 fantasy points per game in a full point setting. Javonte finishes with 12.1 fantasy points per game in a full point setting. One guy's going as RB9, ADP 16. One guy's going as RB 37, ADP 107. Gordon was an unrestricted free agent, and Denver decided to bring him back. They also have a new regime, of course, new coaching. They basically have Green Bay's offense is what they're going to bring over. Tight ends coach, offensive coordinator, calling the shots, Nathaniel Hackett in Denver. They brought in Russell Wilson. I don't think Russell Wilson is going to cook like everybody wants him to. He's got a lot of good weapons. I think this offense will be kind of run heavy. I think they'll run more than they pass. Wilson's very efficient. The defense is fantastic. Maybe they can rely on that defense and run the rock. The fact that they brought back Melvin Gordon, I think is very telling, is that this guy has a lot to offer. He's a veteran back. He's a good pass blocker. He's just a good running back. And Javonte Williams is fantastic in his own right as well. You just look across the league, there's a lot of committees. And I think it's important for teams to have committees. To have a 1-2 punch like this is terrific. It keeps everybody fresh. Denver is inside the top 10 in terms of Super Bowl odds. It's a really tough division, but I view them as a playoff squad. I think that it's going to be like 60-40 in terms of, timeshare. And I think Javonte is going slightly too high. And it does pain me to say this. Last year we had Anthony, Andy Behrens. My goodness. It was like Brad Evans, Andy Behrens, former Yahoo guys. Behrens is still at Yahoo. And he came on this show and he told me to like cool it. I was all on Javonte Williams. Of course, I told you I want a consolation bracket. He's like, listen, it's not going to be all Javonte Williams. Melvin Gordon is a veteran back. He is great inside the red zone. He's going to get his fair share of usage. And he did. I think even though it is a new regime, it's new coaching staff, I think it's going to play out very, very similar. And do you want to have a Melvin Gordon, like a kind of like a guy that's going to split touches with Javonte Williams, who has a higher ceiling, who potentially could be the league winner? I know that there's some pause there and reason to be hesitant of maybe pulling the trigger on a Melvin Gordon, but we're getting him roughly as RB40. If you can get him as your flex, I think that's not bad. I think it's pretty good. Listen, Gordon has had 8+ touchdowns in 6 of his 7 years in the NFL. And the 1 year he didn't was his rookie season. He actually had 0. And then he bounced back with 10. I just think he's a pretty good back. I just think he's a decent back that's going to get a little bit of work. I think it's going to be 60-40. I really do. Howard Benner came on the show a couple weeks ago and he told us he thought it would be like 65-35, maybe 70-30. I think it's going to be closer than that. I think it's going to be a bit of a split. So I'm in on Melvin Gordon. The other back that I like here that I think is undervalued, is not really a sexy name, is J.D. McKissic of the Washington Commanders. So you see the note there on the right, 5th in targets and catches among running backs since 2019. He's just a couple years removed from an 80 catch season. they really wanted to bring him back. It was looking like he was going to Buffalo, and Washington was like, no, we want you, come back. And he was like, okay, I'm coming back anyway. So that's kind of telling that they wanted him to come back. Last year, they used him as a third down back, and they used him in the 2-minute drill. I know Antonio Gibson is a former wide receiver, converted running back, but they just don't use him that way. They line him up sometimes in the slot, out wide. I don't know why they don't use him on third down or a 2-minute drill. That's really confusing to me. I know that they brought in Brian Robinson, who is going to probably be the goal line back. He's at least going to steal some touches from Antonio Gibson, who had a lot of work inside the red zone last year, suffered an injury towards the end of last year, a shin injury. I think that Gibson's a bit of a bust. I thought he was a bust last year. He kind of returned value towards the end of last year. It wasn't good for him throughout the middle part, but he did come back and he got a lot of work and a lot of touches towards the end of the season. And he got banged up a bit. I don't know if he has the body type to be a guy that can that can handle 20 plus carries week in and week out. I think it's going to be a bit of a split backfield, but I think McKissic is going to take this role. Carson Wentz, he's been known to kind of check down to running back. So I think JD McKissic is going to be a guy that will continue to rack up some catches out of the backfield in a full point PPR league. I think he's an interesting target. Can we bring that board up one more time, Tyler? I just want to see where he finished in fantasy points per game. 11.6, RB 37. He missed some time, guys. He had 43 catches on 53 targets, and he missed games last season. He's not a sexy name, but he's a guy who could be a difference maker for you. I have him as RB40 in a full point setting. He's going as RB51. A couple other names here on the board. Tyler, let's bring it up, and we'll roll through these names quickly. So James Robinson, don't need to spend too much time on Robinson, but of course, I kind of was a little bit on the fence with Robinson. I did draft him in a couple spots. That Independence Day draft, I took him, I think, in round 10 as RB48 or something like that. Now he's going right in around that range, RB47, ADP of 138. We'll see how much he jumps up boards now that he's on the practice field, and Doug Peterson said he won't start on the PUP list and that he should be ready to go week 1. 164 attempts in 14 games last year, 767 yards, 8 touchdowns, 31 catches on 46 targets. In his rookie campaign, he also played 14 games, but he had 240 attempts, so 80 more. He topped 1,000 yards and had 7 touchdowns on the ground. He also caught 49 balls and 60 targets. That's just the difference between the coaching staff last year and Urban Meyer not wanting to give this guy the attempts and having the attempts in the exact same amount of games as a rookie and finishing as a top 10 running back. I don't think he's going to be a top 10 running back. Travis Etienne is going to be sprinkled in, but I think he is going to be the lead. I think he could be a low end RB2, certainly a flex running back. You're not taking him in that spot, or in terms of draft capital, it's just not going to cost you that. 4.5 yards per carry, 1,800 yards on the ground, and just shy of 1,600 receiving yards in 2 years. Marlon Mack is in there. We touched on him yesterday. I think I'd rather Dameon Pierce. He's going as RB44. I think there's more upside there, but from Mack as RB56, there's certainly a ceiling, and he is valuable at this point. He only played 6 games last season. He was behind Taylor and Hines. He only had 108 yards and 28 carries. So he didn't do a whole lot there, but 7 games, that's it in the last 2 years. So we haven't seen a whole lot from him. But in 2019, he had 1,000 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns on 247 attempts, 17 touchdowns and 2,000 yards in back-to-back seasons with 31 grabs in 2018 and 2019. So he's not too far removed from 1,000 yards. And then Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards. Mark Ingram didn't do a whole lot last year, but he does have 3 1,000-yard campaigns, 2 of them with the Saints. In 7 games with the Saints last year, he only had 68 attempts and 260 yards, but he did catch 20 of his 26 targets. I do believe we will see Alvin Kamara suspended. It may not be this season, though. It may take some time. It's a bit of a tricky situation here in terms of Melvin Gordon. So this is kind of my thinking when it comes to, not Melvin Gordon. This is kind of my thinking when it comes to Alvin Kamara. There's a couple ways that this could happen. The case could get thrown out, which we'd be looking at maybe 2 to 4 game suspension to start the season. If he pleads not guilty, it could, and then probably goes to trial. In that instance, we're looking at a felony charge, which is a mandatory 6-game suspension. If this is drawn out, the legal process is drawn out, we may not see the suspension until next year. So there's a bunch of different moving pieces. I believe, to answer your question, Lee, if he is suspended for 6 games, I think he would go in around RB40 to RB45. That's probably a 7th round pick. He doesn't have a lot to offer, but he will be a guy that he'll be the lead on a decent team that ran the ball a lot last year, really, in terms of pace of play. They slowed it down, and the percentage of plays, it was heavy run. opposed to passing. No Sean Payton there. It could still be heavy run. So I think he's an okay target I think he's an okay target right now as potential, like kind of planning ahead if Alvin Kamara gets suspended. But also if you have Kamara and this guy is indeed suspended, then you have a starting running back, or you just draft Kamara. I think you handcuff him with Ingram and kind of play that out. It's a pick that's not going to cost you a whole lot, just like Gus Edwards. It's a pick that's not going to cost you a whole lot. He's had 700 plus yards in each of his 3 years in the NFL, 5.2 yards per carry. He's not going to catch any passes, but he could still churn out another 700 yards for you on the ground.